So welcome to S4, Tom.
Thank you, Dale. Pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone.
This is, it's not official, but I feel like I kind of have a legend series of interviews, you know, with like Ed Schweitzer and Spaff, and now you're the latest addition to the legend series. You heard in the intro, I mean, OPC, its popularity from the beginning OPC Classic through OPC UA was largely driven under your leadership and such. And let's start there, because one of the things, I watched a lot of your interviews, one of the things you say a lot is success is measured by the level of adoption. So clearly, OPC, huge success, especially OPC Classic. I mean, it was 80, 90% of every facility had that. So looking back at the Classic, what were one or two of the key things you did that led to that success with adoption?
You know, Dale, I had been involved in a lot of industry standards prior to OPC, and at the time I was working for Rockwell Automation, and I kept saying, okay, I'm going to do another standard here, but it's all about interoperability. And I said, the thing I really want to do is I don't want to write something that's academic. No, I apologize to academia, but I wanted to write a standard that the end users wanted and the suppliers would actually build. So that's when I started getting quoting. I said, you know, people would ask, well, how do you measure success, Tom? It's by the level of adoption of an industry standard. And that was really what the code was. And I said, let's do this, make it easy for the suppliers, but solve a problem that the machine builders and the end users wanted. And we started OPC, it was focused at process control. But it became, you know, far more than process control. It became, you know, living and breathing interoperability. So, you know, the key was I had to make the vendors want to work together. So I started getting, you know, OPC started to say, what does the C stand for, Tom? It used to stand for OLE for process control. Yep. OLE, the Microsoft technology for object linking and embedding. But I started using the C, and I said it's all about collaboration, and it's about competitors working together to, you know, really achieve adoption of the technology.
Well, and you had said that OPC Classic, at least, part of its success was it was a vendor-driven standard, which surprised me, because a lot of times when I don't do a lot of standards work anymore, but when I did, there was always a push to get more asset owners involved. They'd say, we need more asset owners in here, but you're saying the vendors were the one that made the decisions and pushed OPC.
You know, when we started OPC, there were 4 or 5 key members that did this. And I'll be honest with you, I was an engineer at the time, and I ended up having to figure out how to do marketing. But, you know, we wrote the standard deliberately, and we took a few vendors, and we had the first standard developed in like 6 months. But it was really about, it was solving a problem that the vendors wanted solved. And, you know, then we started to increase and find more vendors. But the vendors wanted it actually more than the end users wanted it.
Why would, you know, we're talking in the 1990s here. Why would vendors want interoperability? Because a lot of times they wanted, especially back then, they wanted lock-in, right? They didn't want you to be able to use someone else. What was the carrot to make them want to do this?
Well, actually, the simple thing was, and it's a standard joke, and I have a lot of friends in a company called Wonderware. And Wonderware, they owned the market at that time for, you know, visualization and the SCADA.
On the PC, right? That was when the PC was involved.
And, Rockwell really wanted a piece of that. And so Rockwell, their motivation was, Tom, go do this because we want to write better software. We want to be able to have more connectivity than just Rockwell. We want to be better than Wonderware. As a matter of fact, when we first started the thing with Rockwell, they actually named themselves RockSoft for a period of time, for Rockwell Software. Okay. And it was about competing with Wonderware. Ultimately, I brought Wonderware into the table to make, you know, because it was important to have them part of the fold. So.
Was there another key vendor that wanted to compete with Wonderware that said, oh yeah, Rockwell, I like this, we'll do this too, or were they smaller vendors that joined?
Well, actually, the company was Involution.
Okay.
So when we started OPC, it was Rockwell, it was Involution, it was Opto 22, and it was Fisher-Rosemont that ultimately became, Emerson. So it was really Involution and Rockwell who were the visualization that really wanted a piece of this, and they really wanted a piece of the Wonderware business.
Okay. And just for the audience, we're not going to stay in the history for a long time. Tom has some strong views on present and future as well. We'll get there.
Yeah.
Let's, when again, going back to your quote, success is measured by the level of adoption. Does that apply to non-protocol standards? Would that apply to like IEC 62443?
All the standards, as we develop these standards, we have to look at the business. And you have to look at, why do you want to develop this standard, developing the standard, particularly 62443, and what they're doing and why they do it. It's very important that, as you build this thing, and I also talk about a good standard's never done. Always remember that. A good standard continues to evolve. So if you say a standard's done, it's done. You'll never get it adopted. It's got to evolve because we're in a changing world. So that's kind of the important thing. And there's a lot of other industry standards. And as I created OPC UA, I started looking even more about collaboration with other organizations. So for example, Secure by Design is built into OPC UA. We didn't invent it though. Mm-hmm. It basically leverages the good security standards that are already out there.
Okay. So if you were all of a sudden put in charge of ISA, what would you tell them to do to increase adoption of 62443? Because some people think I'm a 62443 hater. I actually think it's an amazing set of documents that's vastly underused.
Yes.
So I don't view it as the success it could be because it doesn't have the adoption. So you're much better. You've been doing this for 30 years. What would you tell them to do?
I would say, and there's some other things that are going on now in the industry where you really have to work with the guys that are important in the industry, the real stakeholders. Make sure that are you meeting the needs of them, and what are the roadblocks preventing them from adopting the technology? If you don't think this is a real problem, well, then we're not doing our job right. Dale, that means you got to evangelize to these guys to make sure that they recognize, well, if I think I'm solving the right problem, it's my job, not their job. It's my job to make sure that they get it and that this is why we think this is important. So that's the biggest thing you have to do. You really have to work with the suppliers, and the end users will come.
Okay, so again, you would take more of the vendor approach.
I take more of the vendor approach because without the vendors, you won't get it adopted. I mean, I've taken the path where a lot of good standards, I'll find a set of system integrators, and I'll find the SIs, and they'll go build this without actually having the supplier build it. But that does half the job. You need the suppliers behind you. Mm-hmm. And that's the challenge. Even with another organization I'm running now, I have to get the suppliers to adopt the technology.
Okay. Now one of your many awards, you are in the Automation Hall of Fame. And when Control wrote an article about that, you said, you're talking about your career and your success, and you said, more fundamentally, what I've learned over the course of my career is the value of and the importance of relationships. It's not the technology that matters, it's the people. It's so important that you form the right partnerships and alliances. And I think that's something that when people hear that, they can shake their heads, yes.
Yeah.
But when you were doing this in the 90s and the teens and the first 20 years, it was a lot of traveling all over the world, face-to-face sit-down meetings for 2 days to hash out things and then go out to the bar at night and get to know each other and that. We're not in that world anymore.
No.
So how do you think the remote type of work is going to affect the ability to get adoption of standards?
So what I'd like to say in some ways, I was a pioneer because when we first started OPC, you were right. We'd go, I learned Dallas inside and out. That became our home city for quite a while. And we used to do a lot of our meetings there and bring everybody together. And we were meeting at least once a month. But then I started realizing, we got to do things where we can develop the standard and continue working in this remote environment. Because these companies are all over the world that we're trying to get collaboration with. So, and now you talk about COVID and what happened there. Well, we had already started to do remote development of the specifications and technology mid-2000, really we did. And we started that because when we developed OPC UA, and we started that in 2004, we had about 100 vendors. And travel was tight. You couldn't get everyone to just come to these meetings. But again, I needed the companies there. I needed support from all these companies, so we had to figure out a way to do this remote. So we started using a lot of different technology, and the go-to-meetings and go-to-webinars, and now everything we do is all via, Microsoft Teams, for example.
Yeah.
You have to.
But how much do you lose that you don't have that going out for the beer or going out for dinner after that? How much is that affecting progress?
The first meetings, you have to have a good knowledge, and you have to meet the people face to face. I mean, we do a lot of our meetings now where it's all video deliberately, because you want to see their expression, you want to see their faces. But there's no substitute for the face-to-face meetings to begin with, and to get to know people and eating the espresso coffee beans and, staying up all night and putting the pizza under the door, stuff like that. There's no substitute for that.
Yeah, and I think we have enough data on that the teams that were together before COVID did really well, and the new employees that joined during COVID really had a tougher time. So let's shift now to OPC UA, because that's what I'm sure a lot of the audience is either using or considering using and such. And one of the great examples I've seen a number of people do is they take the MQTT document, which the original was 18 pages. They take the final version of OPC UA, which is 150 pages, and then they have the 5,000 pages of OPC UA. And so it's this massive document. And when you had an interview with Walker Reynolds, he made the contention that only 20% of OPC UA is implemented by any one of the vendors. That was his contention, not yours. Do you think that number is right? Or if not, would you ballpark a number?
So Walker and I are actually good friends. We've known each other a while, and everybody said, "Tom, what are you doing? Doing a podcast with Walker?" And if you know who he is and do the podcast, but he's right. I mean, the problem with OPC UA and what happened over a period of time is we tried to solve a lot of problems for a lot of different industries. So sometimes that involves, that you can't just do one thing. We did a lot more things that allow other vendors to participate and contribute to. There's a lot of the collaborations we've done. Some of the ones we've done, would I have done, now? No. I wouldn't have done a companion spec for, no offense, kitchen equipment.
Okay.
That wasn't the right thing to do. But, at the time, well, the kitchen guys wanted this, so we thought, oh, we'll go do it. Well, you can't do that, because that diminishes the value of the standard by doing that.
I guess if you're looking at overall adoption, if that's going to have really low adoption, then you're bringing down your total adoption.
It brings down the whole adoption, because you look at all these other collaborative information models we've developed, and I talk a lot about a unified namespace. I just met this week with John Dyke, who partners. He runs Sesame, and they're developing a whole new architecture and API that we're going to bring forward for smart manufacturing. So OPC UA tries to do everything for everyone, and so that diminishes actually the level of adoption, because you can't solve all the problems for everyone.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you had the original OPC DA, data acquisition, then you had alarms and events and HDA and a couple of others. Those never got, the DA was the one that was the key. Everyone did DA.
Everyone did DA. Everyone was successful. But for example, when we did HDA, the historian, that was a simple example of there was Aspen Tech, there was Canary Labs, and there was OSI Soft. And getting those three companies to agree, that was impossible. They were not about to agree. They all had what they thought were the right answers. They wanted their solution to be the standard. So we ended up creating, unfortunately at the time, I call them optional interfaces. So HDA has multiple ways of doing the same thing. And that's what happened with UA. I mean, we tried to do a lot of different things with UA. Okay, yeah, we can go solve this for you. But again, it becomes a niche part of the specification.
And remind me, when did UA first come out?
When we started UA, it was in 2004. I was still working for Rockwell at the time, and then I became full-time OPC after then because it was big. And it was going to be something where UA, classic OPC was built on Microsoft.
Right.
And I needed a way to start expanding outside of just the Microsoft platform. I wanted to hit the embedded world. I wanted to have the OPC technology pushed down where, for example, alarming belongs at the lowest level. And I wanted to push that down, and you can't do that at the Microsoft platform. Right?
And from a security standpoint, we always hated it because it was DCOM and it was not very pretty through a firewall. You had to get like a Matricon or something to go through a firewall efficiently. So security people were also very excited for UA, but the pickup on UA was incredibly slow, and I think it was like there was this DA is good enough. And why move to OPC UA? DA is good enough. My customers are happy with DA.
Customers were happy with DA, so it was a classic case of if it's not broken, don't fix it. Why are we doing this, Tom?
Right.
And that was the classic case, but we knew that we had to go and solve a problem for the embedded world.
Right.
And that's where we started into that area. And you mentioned ISA at one point in time. One of the first collaborations I did was with ISA 95. That was actually the first companion spec we developed for OPC UA. It was a partnership between ISA 95 and Mimosa at that point in time.
And does that live on? Is that still happening?
It's a done specification. Actually, the Open Process Automation Forum actually does use OPC UA with ISA 95 now.
Okay. So you talked a little bit, maybe, and I won't push you again, but do you have a number besides 20%? What would you say, what percentage of the standard is implemented? And if you don't want to guess, that's okay, but.
Honestly, it's probably more like 10%. Walker gave me more credit than we deserve. I mean, because if you take a look at how many different standards there are as part of OPC UA, particularly the companion specs, a lot of these things are really great, but no one's building them. I have a good friend in VDMA. I just met up with Andreas Farth this week. And he said, so Tom, we need to figure out how to get VDMA more successful into the US. And I said, Andreas, it's a European standard. What do you want us to do?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a different mindset. In some ways with Europe, and I hate to say this, guys, Europe is ahead of us with adoption of industry standards. And in a lot of ways, OPC UA has become more of a European standard now.
Really?
A lot has to do with probably Industry 4.0 and the knockoffs after then, because there's a government, push behind these things. So if you can have a government behind it, that will help out too. That also motivates, there's a CRA is an important standard in Europe right now. And guess who's driving it? It's the government is driving it.
So do you think CRA will push people to UA more?
That's a scary thought.
Or how about NIST 2, the one that's aimed at the asset owners?
I think what would happen is OPC UA is going to have to make some strong adjustments to support the CRA in order to make that happen.
Okay. Well, so it's interesting if you say it's 10% or 20%, some small percentage. If you just took that slice, you might have decent adoption, right? Because there is, I would say that most offerings have an OPC option, OPC UA option at least now.
Yeah.
But they're doing a lot of different things. Where should OPC UA focus on in terms of not so much just, well, partially writing additional standards, but where should they focus their adoption on? Where should they say, this is where we're going to get up to that? I mean, you're probably never going to get 80, 90% like you did with DA, but this is where we get up to 40, 50, 60%.
You know, I have a bunch of friends both in the OPC community and, you know, that are kind of in the outside of the OPC community in some ways. And Walker Reynolds, for example, is actually he's a very strong proponent of OPC UA. Him and I have chatted multiple times. There's a guy who's also been involved in a lot of things, a guy named Rick Bellotta, who I've been friends with forever. And he's got, you know, he's very focused at, you know, how do we push out what's known as the universal name server and the UNS. I think what needs to happen now, Dale, is we need to go back to the roots, go back to making sure that we're delivering key technology that the vendors want to adopt. You know, when OPC first started, you know, we were an organization, and I said, in order to get success, I can't put up roadblocks. So I was a proponent of making, you know, open source. Our OPC and OPC UA were all open source deliberately because I wanted to eliminate a roadblock. I didn't want them to have to be a member of OPC in order to build it.
And it's still on GitHub, right? OPC.
It's still on GitHub. And there's other organizations also, there's, you know, that have developed open source versions of OPC UA as well.
Now I think I got this right. You said OPC should focus on process control, focus on what we do best. So what does that mean? What do you kind of say? Not necessarily stop, you know, kill the standard, but you say this is where we're going to focus our adoption efforts. What kind of falls off if you focus on process control, and maybe what are the key parts related to process control?
There was an organization, I was just talking to the guy, Darm Dartusiak, he was ExxonMobil, good friend of mine, and he started the Open Process Automation Forum, which was ExxonMobil and a bunch of chemical companies' process control. And they said, Tom, we like OPC UA, and at the same time, but we also like this DDS technology, I don't know what it is, but we also like this MQTT stuff too. And can you figure out a way to make all this stuff work so that I can get the vendors, the Honeywells and the Emersons and the ABBs to actually develop me something that we can go buy, and so I can buy a product from Emerson or buy a product from Honeywell or buy a product from Schneider, and they'll work together. So that's kind of the thing. I said, let's go back and make sure this thing works for Open Process Automation Forum. And actually at the time, I put a team in there from OPC and had all the different companies, you know, actively. And of course, OPAF has been around 9 years now. And again, it's still not fully adopted.
Yeah, it's been a slow roll too.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to do. So it's, you know, I mean, that's why I think, you know, that's why I put you in the Legends series, because not many people have accomplished this. More efforts don't work than do work. Now, we've had Randy up here on stage before giving talk. He's a really smart guy, but his answer to things is almost, OPC UA can do that. And I think he's not wrong. I think there's that level of flexibility. If the discussion I see the most is, where is MQTT best and where is OPC UA best? Do you have any like high level way you could say, in general, I would push someone to this one or this one based on these factors?
You know, I'll use a simple example. I can open up a can. I can open it up with a can opener, I can open it up with a pop top, or I can open it up with a knife.
Yeah.
Okay? What makes best sense, all right? So I use that example for reasons, but the guys that developed MQTT and Sparkplug-B, Arlen Nipper, again, him and I are good friends.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a small world in the industry business. There are places where, you know, MQTT, it's more lightweight, It's, solves a lot of problems. Is it the game? Is it the end for everything? No. Is OPC UA the end for everything? No. When we were developing OPC UA, I said, I need a binding to the protocol MQTT underneath. So that was one of the things that we did. But it's not the right solution to do OPC UA over top of MQTT because it's too big.
Yeah.
It needs to be more focused down. And Randy's a good friend of mine too. I hired him into OPC.
Yeah, you worked with him for a long time.
We traveled the world together.
And he's given some great sessions here too.
Yeah, and he's a very smart guy. And we got to start developing. OPC needs we need to focus more on, again, getting the vendors behind it to build it.
Well, you said, I think you gave time-sensitive networking, TSN, as an example of maybe where not to focus now. And that was something you were excited about at the time, right? When you brought it in. But that's what I kind of like is you say, we tried this, it probably was a mistake, we're going to do something else. And so that would be an example of something that maybe isn't the right fit for OPC UA.
So at the time we built something called OPC UA over TSN, there was a group of these vendors, and they were called the Shapers. And a group of these vendors, including Rockwell and Schneider and ABB, they were like, we can go develop OPC UA over TSN, OPC UA, and go down and replace Profinet and Ethernet IP and EtherCAT and CC-Link. And at the time, I'm like, oh, this would be really cool. And I actually liked the TSN technology. It was designed for the audiovisual industry.
Okay.
It was a perfect technology for that. And I thought, let's figure out if there's some way of developing it for, industrial automation. I never wanted to go replace the field buses, though. Although I was quoted like, Tom, this is going to replace all the field buses. Like, oh, that's going to get me shot.
That's a battle you don't want to fight, right?
It was going to get me shot.
Oh, yeah.
But, TSN, again, it's a beautiful technology. It's good for certain things. It allows us to do things where I can take multiple protocols and put them on the same physical wire. So I can run Profinet and Ethernet IP and EtherCAT on the same physical wire, and I can hook up a printer, and they all work together. How many people need that?
Yeah.
Is the question.
Yeah. Well, let's end. I'm going to kind of go back and forward here, way back and then to the future. You said many people thought I was crazy when I started OPC. And then a little later you said someone needs to shake up the industry. So they probably needed that crazy back then, right, to shake things up. So maybe talk a little bit about that, and then what crazy do we need now? What needs to be shaken up now in the world that you deal with?
We all give the hype of the word digital transformation. We've got lots of different devices and disparate networks out there. You want to have IT to OT convergence. And I do a lot of thought leadership type articles that talks about that. I don't talk about products. I talk more about, let's talk about how we make this thing and we, really develop, synergistic solutions. At the time when I couldn't spell MES when we first were doing, and I met with a bunch of the MES vendors, and I said, I need to go figure these guys out. And that's how I met guys like Rick Bellotta and guys like this, and I had no idea. I didn't know what an SAP was. I didn't know what they did. All I knew is we needed to figure out a way to work together. And OPC UA was the idea, the solution of getting these things together. To work with, I speak about collaboration and really working together. And we've been able to bridge some gaps. And, there's a lot of data out there, but I also talk about, Dale, more information. I want to get information out of the data. And a lot of these great companion specifications we developed are focused at the data. Well, if you really want to, bridge the gap into the enterprise and into the IT side, they don't want the raw data. Don't give me 30,000 I/O points. Give me information so I can make intelligent decisions about it and then do bidirectional down. So that's kind of more of the effort of working with, the industry standards we really need to do.
And is any group tackling that yet?
Kind of, not yet.
Gotcha. So that's
Need
something
more
we should shake up, and we should
That's
get some
something
people
that I'm
involved.
trying to, sometimes I'm quoted, Tom, you're kind of disruptive. It's like, yeah, well, you got to be sometimes. You got to think out of the box. I mean, if you think about, I can remember we never dreamed we'd be able to do video calls.
Yeah.
Our kids do it all the time now. I mean, we're doing FaceTime or, whatever. We do remote development now where, you don't have to meet people face to face. We're in a whole changing world, right? So you got to be able to adapt to change. And, adapting to change really means you need to start listening. Listen to what people, are talking about and help them, solve the problems that they need solved. I mean, I've been into, I can't name the company, but they were gathering data off of their bottling line.
Yeah.
And the way they were gathering data was they were plugging in a USB, thing, and they were, exporting a CSV file. And this was a year ago.
Oh.
This is crazy. It's like, but, you look at a lot of these, the 90% of the manufacturing is done by small companies.
Yeah.
So they take a while to adopt the technology. And bringing forward something, as big as whether it's MQT or OPC UA, they're not necessarily ready for it. Now, if the vendors supply the technology and make it easier for them to use, then it would be great.
Okay.
And that's kind of the key, Dale.
Well, I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you for coming for us,
Thank you.
S4. Thank you so much for all the change you've driven. I mean, I think everyone here has worked with some of the things that you helped lead and make happen. So please join me in thanking Tom.
Thank you.